Okay, grade 10. What date is it today? It's the 25th of April, and it's nice to chat to you again. It was actually, I found quite helpful to be able to see some of your faces, during the test or whatever. But I know that for many of you, you were kind of hiding and you were just writing the test and then uploading it. But it really went quite well. I was actually kind of surprised. I had never done a test online before. In fact, I think I gave you some wrong information because I was saying, well, maybe the easiest thing to do is just to email me the test, the answers back. But about 4 or 5 of you did it, but it seemed to be a bit more complicated than just basically sticking it back onto Google Classroom and then sending it right back to me in the same way that I sent it to you. And therefore, I was able to give you a mark and I was able to give you comments on most of the responses. And to be brutally honest, I was really quite happy. I don't think anybody actually failed the test. There was a couple who were not as strong as I was hoping, but on the whole, 21 students, I would say that there is at least 19 who I was really amazed with, and I thought the two slightly weaker ones were coming along and improving. So we're going to be going over the test a little bit today. But I just want to say that we're coming to the end of the lockdown, it seems, here in Vietnam. I want to be super grateful to the government. I think we should all be grateful. I think the government has done a fantastic job of keeping us safe compared to other places like Canada, who people have been dropping like flies. I think today, if I'm not mistaken, I just heard on CNN that there were, I think, 3,000 people who dropped dead in the United States today. So that is super duper scary. And for that reason, we should be super duper grateful that we have a government that knows their business, as we say in English, and that they know what to do in these critical situations. And I think that also the Vietnamese people tend to be much more cooperative and they understand that the government is making the best decisions. And I think there's a lot of kind of crazy individualism going on sometimes in the West where people say, well, no one's going to tell me what to do. And there's no way that they're going to tell me not to go to a restaurant or have my hair cut or open up my business or open up my shop. So a lot of people are still kind of wandering around doing their normal business when they shouldn't really have been doing it. I mean, I would walk out here in Echo Park and I would see nobody. I went to the supermarket to buy a loaf of bread. I didn't see a pussycat there. I didn't see a dog or a cat or a mouse or anything running around. It kind of looked a bit of an eerie sort of scene where it had come to the end of the world or something, and I was the last person standing. But fortunately, that was not the case. We've got a few questions here. I think most of them were related to vocabulary. Students were writing to me saying they didn't quite understand the questions on the test. I've got the test in front of me on the big screen here. And the first question was related to the word challenges. That was in the essay question. It says, discuss two challenges for governments in the implementation of successful fiscal policies in the modern economy today. So I took that question right out of an old AS paper, and that was definitely not a question that was just tell me everything that you know about fiscal policies. I mean, it's really, the problems that you're facing, if you are trying to implement, fiscal policies. And, it's probably the case that if you were a Keynesian or a socialist or a communist or someone who believed in the positive intervention of the government into the economy, then you would be facing challenges, okay? And I can think of 100 of challenges, because I've lived in the West where people love to criticize those on the left, telling us that we're doing too much for society, or that, you're creating more problems than you're solving. I mean, fiscal policies means taxing and spending, so it means that a lot of people don't like to be taxed. They say that taxation is a form of theft. So they feel that it's a question of their individual rights that people should not be taxed. Well, of course, that sounds like a fairly lofty idea. Nobody, including myself, likes to be taxed, but we realize that a society without government revenue is not going anywhere at all. So the word challenges, if I stick to the question here, is basically asking for two kind of problems that governments will face when they're trying to, put in force. I'm trying to find a synonym for implementation, but to put into action fiscal policies. And you could use all sorts of the Laffer curve, or you could just sort of say that a lot of people don't believe in the equity promotion issues related to fiscal policies. They don't see much value in equity. Just the fact that people don't cooperate anymore, and they actually hide their personal income on offshore bank accounts on islands in the middle of the Indian Ocean is one of the challenges. I mean, how do you get government revenue when you find that people refuse to cooperate and they don't want to pay any taxes, particularly obviously the rich people, because they're paying the most tax? So there is no easy answer to that. I mean, clearly you need to be monitoring things like offshore bank accounts, and you have to punish companies who do it. In fact, I was just reading an article in a business magazine the other day, and they were saying that a lot of governments today are not going to be helping companies or corporations who hide their taxation or their revenue. They don't want to pay taxation. So a lot of governments are kind of helping out small businesses to make sure that they survive this whole period of coronavirus. And the bottom line is that if you're kind of hiding your income, and usually the government knows it, but they can't do anything about it. If you're hiding, like Apple Computers, they've got billions of dollars in bank accounts on small islands in the middle of nowhere because they don't want to pay their taxes. Amazon.com are a super example of that. Jeff Bezos, the CEO, he is actually the richest man in the world with something like $700 billion with a B as his assets, and he doesn't want to pay taxes. Richard Branson of Virgin Airlines, he doesn't want to pay taxes, and they're all hiding it. So those are the companies who just will not get a bailout. They're not going to get any help from governments who are kind of sending money to many people and companies during this time where they're telling everybody to stay home. And for that reason, companies have to close down, and they're threatening to go bankrupt, et cetera, et cetera. So governments are borrowing money and printing money and getting into quantitative easing, et cetera, to try to keep the economy afloat so that when we come to the end of this whole coronavirus problem, that we still have jobs to go to and an economy to tax, and a society where people are not just starving to death or whatever. So these are the problems that I wanted you to talk about. Okay, so anytime that a government puts their emphasis on their strategy of taxing and spending, they're going to be faced with 100 problems. And I asked you for two. Okay, so if I can think of 100, you can think of two. Hopefully you can think of two. Okay, so that was the first question. It was just a question, I think, about what is the meaning of challenges? Okay, so really it's talking about problems. Okay, what was the other question here? Where are we here? Yeah, I mean, is that it? I think there was another question. I think maybe I've forgotten to write it down, but I think that there was another question related to strategies. Okay, the concept of strategies. Choose two examples of strategies. Okay, to promote supply side economics. And so I wanted you to talk a little bit about, first of all, what was supply side economics, and how does, let's say, two of those, let's say cutting taxes and privatizing, okay? Well, how, in fact, would that strategy solve, one macroeconomic problem? And I gave you the right or the choice to choose the one that you wanted to. And you could have said, okay, well, unemployment. Okay, so how does cutting taxes solve unemployment? That would be the question that we're asking. And the second one might be, cutting taxes and privatization. I said, how was privatization, how is that going to solve inflation? Okay. So that would be basically how you would answer that question. Okay, I think that's it. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to go into a little bit of the test. I just want to quickly just zip through the test to make sure that all of you felt okay about it. Okay, I mean, there's not much to go over in question one, the vocabulary, because all of those I just took right out of the book. Okay, and really the only challenge for some of you would be to give me an example. I think one of you who normally does really, really well on all my assignments and tests forgot to give me an example. And so that student actually only got out of 10 really rather than out of 20. So that was a terrible shame. So really what you had to do is, first of all, you had to tell me what it is, okay? And then you had to give me a concrete example, like not just repeating the same words of the definition, but giving me a sort of like expansionary monetary policy, okay? Well, so expansionary monetary policy is obviously, we know what monetary policy is. We know that it is the control of the money supply. Expansionary means that you're expanding the money supply. Okay, so what would an example of that be? Okay, so that would probably be a Keynesian who is trying to implement monetary policy by, let's say, cutting taxes in order for there to be more money in the circulation, okay, or reducing the interest rates, that the central bank will reduce the interest rates that the commercial banks charge, which will make borrowing more attractive or less expensive, and therefore people will rush out and borrow money, and this is actually going to create an expansion of the money supply and to try to get the economy moving. So that would be a very typical Keynesian kind of solution to an economic growth problem. Okay, we had five true or false questions. I thought they were quite easy, but I think Voodoo Lynn was in fact the only one who got them all right. I don't like to name names on this, but I just thought that I should say that. That first of all, an increase in the rate of inflation will cause the demand for money to increase. So just think about what you're saying here. I mean, I lived in Zimbabwe in southern Africa for 5 years, and I know for certain that during times of hyperinflation, when inflation is really, really high, that the whole issue of money and getting hold of money and spending money is a really important issue. And so yes, people, they want, not only do they want money during inflationary times, they want it now. They don't want it tomorrow, they want it today, because tomorrow the prices are going to be a lot higher. So for that reason, yes, the demand for money is going to go up when you have hyperinflation. And I mean, I've lived in a lot of strange places where inflation is going crazy, and that's all that people think about. They, is just waiting for payday and then spending every single, dong on the first day that you get hold of the money, because you know that if you wait for 24 hours, the prices will all be higher. So obviously, the demand for money, of actual liquidity, money in your hands, is going to be really, really high. Now, an increase in the rate of interest rate, well, that should be quite obvious. Okay, so as the interest rate goes up, do people want, that money? Well, no, they don't. They don't, and so they think it's too expensive, and therefore this is going to cause the demand for money to go down. That should be very obvious. You know, just imagine if it was 5%, and you're using credit cards, and you've borrowed money to buy a house and to buy a car or something like that, and then suddenly it goes from 5% to 10% interest rate, which means that the amount of money that you got to pay back becomes double, and therefore this is going to discourage you from wanting to borrow any more money. Okay, so the answer is going to be false. So the first one was true, the second one was false. The third one, an increase in the transfer costs of switching between money and non-money assets. Somebody asked me what assets was. Okay, an asset is something that you own. Okay, and it's a thing. Okay, so it could be, something like land might be a non-money asset. Okay, that you're at, or basically anything that is of value, but is not actually considered to be M1, as they say, which is liquid money, which is real cash. Then that is what we call an asset. So an increase of changing, in other words, this might be commissions or whatever. If you suddenly found that the cost of moving, from money to buying, let's say, land, suddenly went up, it could have been from taxes, or government decides to create problems for people. Usually it's taxes, but there might be other issues as well. Will that actually encourage people to spend money? Well, no, it's not, is it? So, if you suddenly discover that, the whole process, maybe it's commissions that the bank is charging, for buying. I got a good example is Microsoft shares. If, let's say, the cost of going to the HSBC bank and buying 100 Microsoft shares suddenly goes up. Let's say HSBC charges a special commission now. Will your demand, for money go up? Well, no. So that will be false. Number 4, an increase in the level of income will cause the demand for money to increase. Well, that should be an easy one. Okay, if you have a greater income, are you likely to spend that money? Now, there are rich people out there, and some of you may be in this classroom itself. I've always suspected that there's a few business class flyers or Mercedes-Benz drivers or passengers in this classroom. But most people, I would say, 99.9% of the people, would say that partly because of the marginal propensity to consume for low-income people, like teachers, for example. You know, the moment we get $100, woo, we spend it right away. There's no question about it. So if you suddenly get an increase in your income, if Chu Van An gives me a raise, actually it's more BUV would give me a raise, then would I actually, have a demand for money? Well, yes, I would, wouldn't I? So, I'm not going to refuse it, and a very small number of people will just put that money in the bank, but most people will actually want to use that money for what money is for. And finally, news leading people to expect. Okay, now in the book, in the textbook, it refers to expectations. Okay, so if there are expectations that the rate of interest is about to rise, okay, will this cause the demand for money to increase? Okay, so what do you think? I mean, if you kind of suspect that that the interest rate might actually be going up next month, don't you think that to take advantage of that information that's coming to you, you're going to kind of rush out and try to get your hands on money before that future increase in interest rates will happen? Okay, so it's like saying, okay, the interest rates is 5%, and your uncle who works as the manager of the bank whispers in your ear and says, hey, buddy, you better borrow now, because if you don't, when you borrow next month, the interest rate is going to be a lot higher. Well, is that going to encourage you to borrow and to try to get hold of money before the interest rates go up? Yes, it will. So the answer is true. So that was true, false, false, true, true was the answer. And then finally, we've got the essay questions, and I really wanted you to try to use the 4-paragraph strategy. Okay, not some of you went a bit too much into detail on paragraph 1, where you wanted to give me half a page or 3/4 of a page just telling me what the definitions of. I just want a very brief kind of introduction to make sure that you convince the examiners that you know what you're talking about. And so, so for that reason, discuss 2 challenges for the government for the implementation of successful fiscal policies in the modern economy today. I took that off an old exam. I thought it was fairly straightforward. I just talked about it for 5 minutes, a few minutes back, and I think it should be quite clear that certainly Keynesians are always being criticized for, using fiscal policies, and whenever you're dealing with other people's money, like spending and taxing, you always get yourself into trouble. People always criticize you, saying, oh, you're taxing me too much, or they individually didn't get any money. I mean, just imagine, you're sitting at home and you got no children, and every year, like in Canada, you would normally pay about $2,000 every year for what they call education taxes, which basically goes to pay for the public schools and the school buses and everything else. So on top of all of your other taxes, which they are quite substantial, you're going to pay a bonus tax of about $2,000 for what they call education tax. Well, if you don't have any children, you're going to say, whoa, this is pretty unfair. Why should I have to pay for, the education of the neighbor who decides to have 15 children? I was careful. I only had 1.2 children or whatever, which is the average in Canada. And some people have a lot of children. And, whether you have a lot of children or you don't have any children at all, you're going to pay the same school tax, education tax. And so for that reason, that would be a real challenge, is just trying to overcome the hostility of most people, not only of paying taxes, but how those taxes are spent. if people don't feel that they're getting something in return for their taxation, they're not going to be all that happy about it. I mean, in Canada, you get free health, and my mother gets kind of almost free prescription drugs, and my two daughters, they had free dental care until the age of 18, I think it was, and I only paid $1,000 a year for their university education. So I know in my heart that the high taxes that we pay, which is about 40%, is quite painful. But I know that I'm somehow getting it back just through the fact that governments are spending money on people. Even today, with this coronavirus, they're trying to keep you alive by sending you a check in the mail every month to make sure that you don't drop dead from hunger. So, that would be the number one challenge I would think of most people dealing with fiscal policies. Question two, choose two examples of strategies to promote supply side economics. Okay, I think I mentioned that before. We could say that the two examples of strategies, might be something like cutting taxes and privatization, and what are the solutions? So maybe cutting taxes would be inflation, and and privatization might be, I don't know, it might be balance of payments, or any of the six of the macro problems that we talked about. Question number three, I thought, was quite a cute question. It was actually a real question on a past paper. It's a funny thing because the Cambridge examiners, they write a letter every year to all the economics teachers asking for us to provide a question, a juicy question, because they kind of run out of interesting questions, and so they're looking for interesting questions from the thousands of economics teachers around the world who teach Cambridge economics. And so I send Cambridge questions quite regularly, which I think are quite interesting. And I'm almost 100% certain that this is one of those juicy questions that somebody came up with, because even myself, I would have to think about it before I would answer this question. So there's no doubt about it. There's a guy called Milton Friedman who comes from the University of Chicago. He's dead now, but he got a Nobel Prize for economics. He's actually one of the gurus of extremely right-wing policies where they promote the idea of government should not, under any circumstances, be involved in the economy, that governments do a lot more harm than they do good. And therefore, Milton Friedman, in his quite famous book, I mean, if you're into this thing, I read it when I was at university, but it's basically the book Capitalism and Freedom is all about telling us how the free market economy is the highest example of freedom, that you cannot be truly free unless you have a free market economy. Well, that's kind of ridiculous, okay, and it's a very extreme position, okay, but that's how he feels, and he got a Nobel Prize for his whole theory and analysis. And he basically argued that fiscal policies and intervening in the economy actually takes away your personal freedom when they try to spend money on taxes and spending and that sort of thing in fiscal policies. And then the question is, do you agree with Milton Friedman or not? I think there was only one student in this class who actually answered that question, and he did a pretty good job with it, so I was quite pleased. But it was one of those kind of lofty questions that I throw out there sometimes just to see how you're going to respond to it. And I thought it was quite a provocative idea, the question, so I stuck it in there. And then finally, there was discuss the effectiveness of fiscal, monetary, and supply side policies to correct balance of payments disequilibrium. Well, there's about 4 pages of answer in your textbook. You should have read it already. And it basically tells us how does fiscal policy solve balance of payments disequilibrium. When they say balance of payments disequilibrium, 99.9% is it's a disequilibrium from a deficit point of view, not from a surplus. Okay, I mean, most people would not consider a balance of payments surplus to be a big problem. Like Saudi Arabia, I'm quite sure, have a balance of payments surplus because they receive more money in government revenue than they spend in government expenditure. So, they would sort of say, oh, that's a real problem. Well, having too much money is not actually much of a problem. So every country, whether it's Vietnam or Canada, by the way, we all face balance of payments disequilibriums. Okay, and some countries they immediately go to the International Monetary Fund to borrow money, and some others they just try to promote more exports and discourage maybe imports through things like tariffs and quotas and that type of thing. And it basically is pretty clearly written in the textbook. And I'm not going to go over it right now, but I just felt that it was a good question. It was well dealt with. Not all the topics are all that well dealt with, in my opinion, in this textbook. I wouldn't say it's a bad textbook, but I wouldn't say it's the best that I've ever seen. But probably it's written in a way which is easy to read, and it relates to the Cambridge syllabus. And so for that reason, this is why most people who are doing this exam and this syllabus recommend this particular textbook. Okay, just briefly, because we're kind of run out of time. We've already done 32 minutes, and I didn't want to go on and on and on and on. But we're going to be, I think we can probably just talk about this more in our session on Monday. We're going to be having a Teams, an Office 365 Teams session on Monday where we can go through the handout. So what I want you to do is it's a handout for Unit 1. We're going back to the beginning. We have completed the AS syllabus. So congratulate yourselves, okay? Give yourselves a hug or give yourselves, make sure you've got your surgical masks on when you give yourself a hug. And you have completed everything that you are required to know for the AS exam. Okay, now that's good news. And if you find everything super duper easy, and I would brutally say, and this is a sign of huge confidence that I have on this class, is that half of you have found this syllabus fairly straightforward and easy, and the other half are perhaps still struggling. But I'm hoping that by the time I do it a second time, that you're going to find it actually kind of easy, and everything will seem to be logical. I mean, I've been teaching this subject for such a long time that I find it logical, but I know that for a lot of people who have never even heard of economics before, that they actually find the logic of demand curves and supply curves and graphs and that sort of thing to be a bit overwhelming. I remember when I was in Bangladesh and I was teaching, one of my first classes, and the students had really no idea what economics was all about. They only chose economics because it fit into their timetable quite nicely. And one of the students asked me where the ovens and the kitchens were that we're going to be cooking with, and I didn't really understand the question. And they went on to say that they knew that this was a home economics class, which which is a bit amusing for me. And a couple of students, I think, had to leave quick when they realized that there were numbers and theories and economies and business and all those issues dealing with economics, and that it wasn't a cooking class at all, and you weren't going to learn how to make a chicken curry at all. So that really shows that for a lot of students, they don't really know what they're getting into. And that's one of the reasons why probably physics and math and chemistry, some of the other Cambridge A-level subjects that you're doing, is perhaps even easier than economics for you, because you've been doing this for a number of years and you know probably inside out what it's all about. They're all very difficult subjects, but you know what it's about. Well, a lot of people, I mean, how many of you, when I first met you I think it was in June or July, I think, when we met in that little class in the A block or whatever, how many really knew what economics was all about? I'm sure that many of you had no idea. So anyways, I don't want to go on and on about that, but I just want to say that we are now moving into chapter 1, and hopefully you are all going to find this time around, when we go through all the chapters, all the units of the AS syllabus, super duper easy, and you're all going to get perfect marks on your test. And then when you finally write the AS exam, which might be even next June, not this June, but next June, I don't know when you're planning on writing the paper, you could actually, you would get A stars right across the board, because I think this is a fantastic class, really. I've done this teaching for a long, long time, and I don't think that I have come across a class as sharp and clever as all of you are. And I'm not massaging your egos, I'm telling you the truth. Okay, so I'm going to wrap that up now. You can see what we're going to talk about on the handout, which I have uploaded onto Google Classroom. Open it up. There's 2 questions. There's 2 homework questions at the end that should be super duper easy for you, since we've covered it many, many times before. But read the handout, answer the questions, send them back to me by Google Classroom. I will mark them and make a comment. And what I really want you to do is I want you to wash your hands at least 10 times a day. I want you to stay away from all your buddies until we're really clear of this virus. And I just want you to stay safe, okay? So think about that. Ho Chi Minh is very proud of all the Vietnamese people today, because nobody has died. We've done a fantastic job helping each other, keeping each other safe, and I want all of us to see each other probably in about a week's time, super duper safe. So bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.